October 23rd, 2077, the first nuclear strikes hit Pennsylvania and New York. Within 2 hours, every nuclear power on the planet had fired everything they had. The United States, China, and everyone else with a button, gone. 2 hours to end 2,000 years of civilization. Your nan's house, gone. Now here's the thing people skip over. The war didn't start in 2077. The resource wars had been going on since 2052. 25 years of conventional warfare over oil, water, and land. The usual reasons humans decide to start shooting each other. By the time the nukes launched, most people had already accepted that the world was ending slowly. Nobody expected it to end in a Tuesday morning. Voltec almost certainly knew the bombs were coming. They had too much ready too fast. Hundreds of vaults fully stocked and built across the entire country, operational the moment the sirens went off. You don't build that kind of infrastructure by accident. You build it because someone told you were going to need it very soon. The Amazon show basically confirms this. Voltec didn't just prepare for the apocalypse. There's a strong argument that they helped cause it themselves, because the vaults only made money if the bombs actually fell. The vaults seal. About 400,000 people make it into vaults across the whole of America, which sounds like a lot until you remember America had 400 million people in it. Voltec saved 0.1% of the population and gave themselves a pat on the back and immediately started running experiments on the survivors. The experiment started on day 1. Vault 29 had children only and no adults were allowed, and a supercomputer called Zax raised them. Whatever the kids turned into, it wasn't normal. Vault 92 seemed fine on paper. In reality, Voltec pumped experimental noise frequencies through the walls designed to trigger psychotic episodes and then studied what happens. And then Vault 77, one man and a crate of puppets. That's not a joke, one man and one crate full of puppets. Voltec apparently wanted to know what happened when you gave a single person a puppet show and left them alone in a bunker. The answer, based on the holotapes found in Fallout 3, is that he had 4 conversations with the puppets, named them, and built an entire social world around them. The residents of Vault 87 thought they were getting shelter. What they actually got was forced exposure to a concentrated form of the forced evolutionary virus, locked in airtight chambers, turned into super mutants against their will. They went in as people and came out as monsters. The super mutants that emerged from Vault 87 broke free almost immediately, and then spent the next 200 years kidnapping humans off the street and dragging them back to those same chambers to be mutated. The Brotherhood of Steel forms 3 days before the war ends. Here's something that gets glossed over constantly. The Brotherhood of Steel, everyone's favorite faction that shows up in literally every other game, whether you asked for them or not, didn't form after the war. They formed 3 days before it ended. Captain Roger Maxson was stationed at Mariposa military base in October 2077, sent there to oversee a group of scientists. What he and his men didn't know was that, because nobody told them, was that the scientists they were guarding were using military prisoners as involuntary subjects for the forced evolutionary virus. When they found this out, things collapsed fast, and the colonel had a complete mental breakdown and locked himself in his office. Maxson had to take control. He started interrogating the scientists, and by October 18th, every scientist at Mariposa was dead. 2 days later, Maxson declared his unit in full succession from the United States government over the radio. He was trying to force a response, make someone acknowledge what was happening in the base. 3 days later, the bombs fell and there was no government left to respond to. Think about the timing. The man who founded the most powerful post-war military faction in Western America spent his last 3 days before nuclear war trying to get someone on the phone. Nobody picked up, and then everything exploded. He led his soldiers and their families on what the Brotherhood now calls the Exodus, a march across the wasteland to a government bunker called Lost Hills. The ones who made it were once tough enough to survive the walk. Maxson's original version was an open brotherhood, work with outside communities, share resources, and rebuild civilization together. And then he died from cancer in 2135, and every vision he had slowly rotted away. And by the time you meet the Brotherhood in the games, they've become exactly the kind of institution Maxson hated. Closed off, hoarded technology, and treating outsiders as threats. One man's death changed the entire trajectory of post-war America. The first survivors. Outside the vaults, people are surviving with nothing. Within days of the bombs, humans were scavenging through rubble that was still hot with radiation. The caps economy starts here. Nuka-Cola bottle caps specifically. Billions of them were scattered everywhere. Someone looked at the rubble of civilization and decided that those specific bottle caps were currency, and everyone eventually just agreed. That's either the smartest improvised economic decision in human history or the most desperate thing that's ever happened. The ghouls are walking around by this point too. People who got hit with enough radiation to mutate but not enough to die. They remember the old world. They remember what a cinema was, and they remember what traffic jams and whatever the 2077 equivalent of Love Island was. They are living history, and regular humans are treating them like monsters. Ghouls survived the nuclear apocalypse, watched everyone they'd ever known die, spent decades rebuilding, and still had to deal with that on top of it. Ghouls are genuinely the most resilient beings in the entire Fallout universe, and the Wastelanders spent 200 years making their lives harder for no reason. If this is the kind of content you've been looking for, subscribe, because I go this deep into every single video. Richard Gray falls into a vat and the world suffers for it. On June 23, 2102, a man called Richard Gray led a small expedition to Mariposa military base to investigate why caravans kept getting attacked near the area. He had been exiled from Vault City for murder before the war. He changed his name and became a doctor, by all accounts a brilliant one. He had no business being anywhere near a military base full of experimental mutagens, but here he was anyways. A robotic arm knocked him into one of the FEV vats, and he spent weeks submerged in it, and when he crawled out he was barely conscious. He couldn't form coherent thoughts. Kept an audio diary where he described being in agony and fading in and out of awareness for days at a stretch. He was dying in the most slow, horrible, and unglamorous way possible. And then the mutation stabilized, and his intelligence increased to a degree that the game describes as exponential. And the philosopher doctor who fell into a vat became something that shouldn't exist. He started calling himself the Master, and over the next 50 years he built an army. He discovered that exposing humans to FEV created super mutants, bigger, stronger, and radiation resistant. He started experimenting and refining the process, and he started capturing people and dipping them in it. He built a cult called the Children of the Cathedral as a recruitment fort. Most of the low-ranking members had no idea they were working for a mutant god with a plan to forcibly evolve the entire human race. They just thought that they found a religion. In reality, they were finding him new test subjects. His elite guards, the Night King, were super mutants equipped with Stealth Boy technology, invisible super mutants, serving a being that had partially fused itself to computer network and spoke in multiple voices simultaneously. His plan, which he called the Unity, was to convert all of humanity into super mutants. Every human forcibly dipped, whether they wanted it or not. His logic was that super mutants were better suited to wasteland survival, stronger, more resilient, and not dying from every single scratch or radiation storm. He genuinely believed he was saving humanity from itself. The problem there was that super mutants were sterile. His entire plan for saving humanity would have ended humanity within a single generation. With no reproduction possible, there was possibly no future, just a world full of super mutants slowly dying out with nobody to replace them. The most powerful psychic being in post-apocalyptic America, a man with genius-level intellect who had spent 50 years building the most sophisticated organization in the wasteland, did not run those numbers at all. And when the Vault Dweller points this out to him in Fallout 1, he just gives up on the spot. The NCR arises. While all of this was happening, a small settlement called Shady Sands was quietly becoming the most important place in post-war America. Shady Sands had water, it had organization, it had Aradesh, a founder who actually cared about building something that would last forever. And by 2186, it changed its name to the New California Republic and started drafting a constitution. The first actual government in post-war America. Tandy, Aradesh's daughter, who you meet as a young woman in Fallout 1, became NCR president in 2196. She stayed in office until her untimely death in 2248. 52 years as president, died at 103. And immediately, the NCR started doing exactly what every government does: bureaucracy, corruption, military expansion into territories that didn't vote for any of this. The NCR shows up to your settlement with a flag and a form, and suddenly you're a citizen of something you never agreed to join. By 2241, the events of Fallout 2, the NCR is already enormous and already showing cracks. The thing that was supposed to save the wasteland is starting to look a lot like the thing that caused the war in the first place. Just the government fighting over resources, expanding into new land, and telling everyone it's for their own good. War never changes. They really did mean it, literally. The Enclave never left. People forget that the United States government technically never died. While everyone else was scrambling to survive, a continuity of government program called the Enclave quietly retreated to remote facilities, oil rings, and classified locations, and kept operating. They had the best technology, the best weapons, and pre-war stockpiles of absolutely everything. They also had a plan to reclaim America. Their plan was to release a modified strain of FEV into the water supply and kill every living thing that had been exposed to radiation since the war, which is basically every fucking person in the wasteland. The Enclave's definition of saving America was killing most of the people currently living in it and starting fresh with the ones they kept sealed away. You stop the Enclave in Fallout 2, you literally kill the President of the United States, but stopping them doesn't erase them. Remnants scatter, regroup, and show up again in Fallout 3, trying a different version of the same plan. The Enclave is the Fallout universe's way of saying that the most dangerous thing to survive the apocalypse wasn't the radiation of super mutants. It was the government that caused the war in the first place, still convinced it had the right and power to decide who deserved to live or not. Robert House and the man who saved Las Vegas. While the bombs were falling, one man was doing something nobody else on the planet managed to do. Robert House, pre-war CEO of Robco Industries, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in America, had calculated the exact date the bomb would fall. He was off by a few days, which annoyed him enormously given the circumstances. But he'd had enough time to bring his missile defense systems online, and when the bombs came for Las Vegas, House's systems shot most of them down. Not all though. Some got through and some damage was done, but the Strip survived nonetheless. In a world where entire cities had been reduced to glass craters, Las Vegas was still standing because one man refused to accept that he couldn't math his way out of nuclear war. House himself survived inside a life support chamber in the Lucky 38 casino, kept himself technically alive for over 200 years, watching from inside his tower as the world slowly rebuilt itself around his city. By the time New Vegas starts, he has been alone in that casino for over 2 centuries. He's watched settlements rise and fall, watched the NCR grow from a town into an empire, slowly marching towards his doorstep. He's had 200 years to make plans and approximately 0 healthy social interactions. Here's what makes House interesting. He's not wrong about his diagnosis. He correctly identifies that the NCR is overextended and heading for collapse. He correctly identifies that Caesar's legion can't survive Caesar's death. He's just also a man who's been alone for 200 years and whose answer to every single problem is more robots. Whether that makes him a visionary or a tyrant is the question New Vegas asks you to answer for yourself. Caesar's legion. Around 2247, a man called Edward Sarlo found a cache of pre-war history books in the wasteland. He read about the Roman Empire, the structure of it, the discipline, and the way that Rome transformed a collection of warring tribes into the most powerful military force the ancient world had ever seen through absolute hierarchy. He decided to do just that in the Mojave with slave armies. He renamed himself Caesar. He conquered tribe after tribe and absorbed them into his legion, replacing their languages, their customs, their identities with one single Roman-inspired culture built entirely around military discipline. You were either with the legion or you were dead. And it worked. That's the uncomfortable part. By 2281, Caesar's legion had carved out a massive territory and was the most militarily effective fighting force the wasteland had produced. Brutal, yes. Morally indefensible in almost every way, but effective nonetheless. Caesar himself is one of the most fascinating characters in Fallout because he's wrong in methods and genuinely arguable in philosophy. New Vegas makes you sit with that tension, and you can hate Caesar and still find yourself unable to fully dismiss his argument. That's what Fallout does best. What 200 years actually tells you. Every major faction, the NCR, the Legion, the Enclave, Brotherhood, the Institute, every single one of them is trying to rebuild the old world, or burn what's left of it so they can control whatever comes next. Nobody's building something new. Nobody looked at 200 years of struggle and asked, what if we tried something completely different? Except for the small settlements, the places the main quest sends you through in 30 seconds. Good Springs, Megaton, little communities that figured out water sharing and crop rotation, and how to keep children alive in a radioactive wasteland through nothing but trial and error and people deciding to help each other. They had no ideology at all, just people being decent because the alternative was dying. That's the actual message in 200 years of Fallout history. The factions are loud and they have the best weapons and they make for great quests, but the thing that actually kept humanity alive wasn't Voltec or the Brotherhood or the NCR. It was the guy in Good Springs who taught himself to fix a water pump, and Bethesda made you walk past him to go find a cooler quest marker. If any of this hit different, subscribe. There is so much more where this came from and every video goes deeper. Drop a comment with the lore detail that broke your brain the most. I read every single one of them because I barely get any. And I'll see you in the wasteland. Bye.